Okay, so let me come over here and join you. And let me see if I can get this the way I want it. All right, well, we're just going to be discussing. So, Clara, you're not going to see much here, a couple of us, but you can listen in on our discussion. All right. This book is a very, very good book. It really, I mean, it's not just what is written, but the way it's written just really inspires missionary zeal. They really have done a great job in the book. And today we did chapters 2 and 3. So let's do it this way. There are main headings in the reading, and what I'm going to do is just kind of walk through these headings and ask you if you highlighted a comment in that heading, kind of work through that way. And we only got about a half hour or so. So, if we don't get into 3, I may even steal a little time out of another class to continue the discussion. So, in the introduction part of chapter 2, or that first section, Puritans and the Missionary Task, did any of you highlight anything that you'd like to share from that? Just that way. So that'd be pages 22 and 23 up. I guess, let's see. Yeah, let's do it this way, up to the section on John Eliot. So just in that first part, up to John Eliot on page 25. What did you highlight? What did you learn?
I left my book in my room.
Oh, sorry. Okay.
My first comment is about John Eliot, so.
Okay, all right. Anybody mark anything about this first section?
I don't know, we kind of talked about it before. It's in the end of 23.
Mm-hmm.
It talks about, like, God doesn't use perfect people. But in one sentence it says, but God has never been constrained by human inadequacy or limited by less than perfect methods.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, I just underlined that. I thought that kind of stood out.
You're on the, where are you at? On
Page 23, it's the end of, maybe it's on chapter 2, or I'm on the right thing. Maybe
Yeah,
it's
chapter 2.
Yeah, page 20. Oh, yeah, okay. Yeah, I see, right. Yeah, that's a refreshing comment, because sometimes we feel like, these are superhuman beings or super Christians of some sort, and they're just not. They're not. Good, that's a good comment. Anything else out of that section?
I guess just like overall reading of like all the missionaries in general, I think we kind of can have a misconception, not misconception, but like false idea in our head that like people who dedicate their life to Christ and go into missions, it's like they're almost above like sin struggles,
Mm-hmm.
in my mind at least.
Mm-hmm.
Like when missionaries would come share in my church and stuff as a kid, I was just always like so amazed. Like it just seems like they're above the rest of us.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just nice to see like, and it's a good reminder too that like going into missions or into ministry isn't going to make my sin struggles go away.
Right.
It's still going to be there.
Right.
And it might make things more complicated.
Yeah. When missionaries come to visit your church, you're only seeing them at their very best. I mean, the worst thing that happens is, their babies are crying or something, but you see them at their best. You don't live with them day by day and, watch the struggles and things that they face. And they're not being hypocritical. I mean, when we were on deputation and we'd go to churches, we obviously tried to do the best we could. And so you don't really get to see them the way that they are in real life. And they do have their struggles. And in that book that you're reading, the 25 Surprising Marriages also points out some of those struggles that husbands and wives had as servants of the Lord. Good point. Anything else? Were the colonial groups in the States here in the colonies, were they basically missions minded or not?
Not really.
The Puritans especially were not. Their main concern was reforming the Catholic Church, right? They really weren't so much for. Okay. I started one thing on page 24 here that I thought was interesting. He talks about the Mayhews, which is a family that served on Martha's Vineyard. And he says here, Experience Mayhew, which is one of their descendants, the grandson, described the failure of missions among the American Indians as unaccountable and inexcusable. I'm near the bottom of page 24. Indeed, this lassitude was all the more egregious in the light of the missionary zeal of the Roman Catholic Church. And he says, it is what more particularly calls for our lamentation that the churches of the Reformation have done so little, while the missionaries of Antichrist are more than can be numbered, and the bigots are at prodigious pains to propagate the Romish idolatry. Sorry, that's kind of old English there. But he's just basically emphasizing the Catholic Church was way out ahead of the Reformed or, evangelical churches in the work of missions. That created some additional hardships for them. So there are times in history when it seems like Satan is just so way up, far out ahead that, is God really who we say he is? Okay, well, John Eliot, let's look at that next section. What about John Eliot? Sharon, what do you have there?
I just asked, how did he learn Algonquin? Because they said it was a really hard language.
Mhm.
And like these days, we have all these language learning tools, but I don't know. Do we know, did he live among them, or he was just super smart, he picked it up?
Well, what was his main job? He wasn't really mainly a missionary. What was his main ministry?
Like, was he a doctor?
He was a pastor at Roxbury Church. Okay, so he as far as I know, he served as pastor most of his ministry life. So even though we remember him today as a missionary, that was really an added ministry that he took on, which it makes it even more amazing that he could do that. Do you remember? I don't think he says in this book here, but in our notes we mentioned that he spent 2 years trying to learn the Algonquin language. I don't remember here if they mentioned how long. But, some of it is just aptitude. There are people that are just wired that way. It's not a spiritual gift. It's like some people are good at math and other people struggle with 1 + 2, We think about that's 3. Okay, yeah. Because I do struggle with that. My dad was good at math and my son's good at math. It's given me. So, Sharon, I think, and I think another part of it is just determination. I mean, he had a passion to reach them. So if you're passionate about it, you learn it. Yeah. What else about John Eliot stood out?
I do think it's amazing he translated the whole Bible into Algonquin. Because then you have to try to figure out like the written form of the language, when maybe not all of them do the written form.
Yeah.
Then you have to teach them how to read it too.
Yeah.
That's a really huge accomplishment.
Yes. Did you catch in here that somewhere the author mentioned that he was one of only 2 missionaries since Ulfilas, which is one that was way back beginning of the early centuries, who actually translated the Bible first into an unwritten language and then taught them how to read it. So the first time that those people ever read their own language was reading the scriptures. Yeah, Ulfilas did that way back. We didn't cover him this year, but and John Eliot did it here in the New World. Anything else about John Eliot strikes you?
It's kind of crazy too how he had to basically start all over again when he was 74.
Yeah.
That would be so discouraging.
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah. And why did he have to start over? What happened?
So the war.
Yeah.
Yeah.
King Philip's War, which is, not his real name. Yeah. Yeah, the believers in the praying towns, many of them were slaughtered. And and some of those who weren't ended up going back into the white man's, booze, liquor. I mean, yeah. And here's a guy who was 74, was he? Yeah. Basically, what's his attitude? Do you remember what it says there about him at that stage? There's a statement there.
Which page was that?
Bottom of 28 and top of 29 talks about him having to start over again. Yeah, the top of 29 there, my doings, alas, they have been poor and small. I'll be the man that shall throw the first stone at them all. And yet, perhaps, perhaps he never really truly understood the impact that he would have in the future.
Page 27 talks about him being really patient instead of rushing the converts.
Yeah.
Which that happens all over, especially in like villages overseas.
Mm-hmm.
You have to be a missionary to a village. You have to be really patient. You have to maybe you have to be there for 10 years before you see your first convert because they don't trust you right away.
Yeah, trust. And just think of the colonies, what level of trust is there, between the colonists and the Native Americans? Almost zero.
Mm-hmm.
So he said, let's give this thing time so they can see Christ in us and develop trust in us before we can. Yeah, do you remember he wouldn't start by preaching? He started by just mingling and maybe answering questions or something about the Bible. But waited to have actual public meetings until there was a rapport that was built with the people. Pretty cool. Now you could say, well, yeah, but he had a church. He was pastoring, so he had a thriving ministry, so he didn't have to be in such a big hurry as somebody that was full-time as a missionary. But I think it was his heart. I don't think that was it. I think that was his heart. Anything else about John Eliot?
I have a question.
Yes, Mary.
On page 25, it says that, I didn't know but that people questioned if those Native Americans were truly believers, or like if they actually converted. Why was that? Like because of how he preached or stuff, or other people were after, or?
Yeah, I don't remember the reason he gave. Can you guys help me out with that?
I think like above, it's like the Native people would ask how to like come to know Jesus. And he was like, well, like read the Bible, but they didn't have one. So they were encouraged to like listen to like his sermons and like meditate on it. And then they said, pray to God.
Yeah, maybe Miriam, it says modern commentators have sometimes questioned whether these Native Americans were truly converted to Christianity, pointing to how few and faint are the analogies between Puritan and Native religion. That's a bit of a complicated statement. I think they might have thought that this was very simplistic, that maybe they were just, when he says, he encouraged them to pray, sigh and groan and say, thus, Lord, make me know Jesus Christ. That sounds a bit superficial, but you have to remember that that's just a quote. There's, there's more to his ministry than that. The Puritans, believe very strongly in predestination, and they also did not believe in propagating the gospel among others. They believed in reforming. So and there were some, Miriam, also that even questioned how human Native Americans were. So I think putting all those things together, there was just a lot of suspicion.
Might there be anything too with the fact that he was translating the language or the Bible into their own language? And maybe people were upset that he wasn't trying to English or like convert them to like the English or something. Because like if you're translating the Bible to a different culture, they don't understand everything the way we do. So there's some things you have to change a little bit.
Yeah.
So I don't know if maybe they're upset at the way he did it. And maybe the Indians would have understood something the right way, but then if English were to read it, would be like, why did he word it like that? That sounds wrong.
Yeah, which brings up another point too, and that is, this idea that you have to Christianize a culture before people can really come to Christ. And somewhere in the reading, I don't remember what page, the author made a really good statement. Some finally came to realize, I think it was the Moravians that said, no, We don't have to Christianize the culture. You lead people to Christ and allow the culture to be influenced by that. So it's the other way around. I think maybe that's part of the reason too why they were questioning, can they really come to Christ? Anything else about John Eliot? There's so much in here.
The praying towns are really interesting.
Yeah.
I don't know. Why do you think he wanted to have specific praying towns that were like separated?
What was the reason? Yeah, that's anybody can help. Yeah, what was the reason for that, folks?
The Bible does talk about separatism, so maybe just to keep them from being around the rest of people, the Indians who were in sin, I guess.
Mhm.
But it was also probably to colonize them.
Mhm. Remember, John Eliot didn't fully, he kind of bought into that idea of colonizing them before you can Christianize them. Do you have your
It's
hand up
just
there?
interesting.
I don't know. I was kind of was, and I was itching my eye, but is it because they're organized like it's because of social and political model?
Mhm.
That's what she just said. I think I just repeated it. Yeah, never mind.
Yeah, no, that's good. That's good.
But like, I don't know, especially with this era, like people are understanding that missionaries have to go in and work and like be involved with the people. So I don't know why I suppose it kind of makes sense why he had like praying towns specifically for like the Christian Indians. But then I just wonder like how often those Indians would go back to their like hometowns and like try and witness or share the gospel with the other Indians there.
I think that he, like a lot of missionaries, was afraid that they would cave under the influence of their ancestral, pagan religion, because Native Americans are very collectivistic. So the influence of family and community are very powerful. And so I think he sensed that and felt like if they were going to really grow and mature as believers, they needed to get away from that negative influence, which a lot of missionaries have done. So, so he just, it's kind of like you can't plant a little sapling and expect it to withstand all the storms. You have to have a greenhouse. Let them grow for a bit in the greenhouse before you transplant them back into the yard. And I think that he saw it that way. He was afraid they wouldn't be able to resist the pressure of community. Well, we got to move on. There's so much here. Did we look at Thomas Mayhew? We didn't look at specifically at him, have we? Okay, maybe he's coming. What do you remember about Thomas Mayhew? Remark about that. It's a shorter section, but anything there stand out?
He preached to a local in Massachusetts.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the Massachusetts tribe. Okay. And where did they serve?
Martha's Vineyard.
Yeah, if you look on a map, it's an island off of Boston, out there a little ways. Today, it's a really ritzy, high-class community. Yeah.
Was it that way at the time or no?
No. No. Colonialism hadn't developed to that point yet.
So were there a lot of Native Americans there?
Yes, we were. Think about it. That's about the only people who are there at this stage. Because remember, these guys got there really early. What else?
I think it's interesting the people there said that why they should like throw away their gods for like just one. I think that's interesting. I don't know.
It is, Miriam. If you come from a society where there are many, many gods, and you're told no, there's only one. I mean, Paul did that in Athens. He did that in Lystra as well. That's not a problem for us because all of us grew up believing there was one God. But just imagine, yeah. And so is it possible that one God does all of this and all these other gods are false? Only the Spirit of God can really convince somebody of that. Anything else about the Mayhews?
I thought it was interesting that his grandson had kind of taken it over, and it was like through the work of both of them that they really saw fruit in the lives of the Native Americans.
Yeah. You remember when when Thomas Jr. and his friend were on board ship? They were heading back to England. Their ship was lost at sea, and Thomas's father, Thomas Sr., who had served as kind of the colonial governor of Martha's Vineyard, continued the work. He took on the work that his son had started, and what was it, 20 or 25 years he served faithfully until he was very old. That's really cool. Really, that's a really neat testimony. And then the great-grandson, whose name is Experience, very interesting name, he also took up the work. That's a really neat example of a multi-generational work in a certain place. David Brainerd, we've talked about him, but did you see something else in there maybe that, obviously there's a lot to the story. Did you see anything in David Brainerd's section that maybe we didn't talk about that was cool?
I don't know if it really was cool per se. It was kind of sad.
Okay.
I had no idea he had like tuberculosis.
Yeah.
So like throughout his whole like missionary journey, he was like slowly dying.
Yeah.
I was like, wow.
Remember where he caught it? While he was at Yale. Yeah. Yeah. My mom still talks about going to school in cheap torn shoes, and her feet would get wet because they had to walk, in the rain and stuff sometimes. So it was common for people to sit in school with wet, cold feet, and that was one of the things that really brought on tuberculosis or consumption. Yeah.
Was it just because they were really poor and couldn't afford the shoes? 'Cause I thought like some of those colleges you had to have a lot of money to get into.
Yeah. But I suppose if you had a lot of money, you'd have two pairs of shoes, so you could carry one with you, and then when you get to school, you could change into your dry shoes. We have so many pairs of shoes that doesn't compute with us. But for poor people, I don't know. And it's also possible that maybe back in those days, they didn't really associate that with tuberculosis as a cause. I don't know. Yeah. But he caught it.
I think a lot of people did. I think it was just a time.
Mm-hmm.
There just wasn't as much to take care of diseases, and
Mm-hmm.
they didn't know how to deal with all that.
Yeah. Yeah. Hmm.
On page 33,
Yes.
I think that's what Brainerd said, that like what was it? That means he tried to use, or like what he tried to do didn't really help, but God still used what he did, even though he did things that like wasn't the best way maybe. And so it seemed like he didn't do anything, but God still used him and like used it for his glory. So
Yeah.
we should try to do it the right way, but sometimes we just don't know. But God can still, like, he uses everyone and everything we do.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good. Go ahead.
No, that was all.
And Brainerd came from a background, of a strong Calvinistic, providence of God election and all that, which we also hold to. And he had to attribute it to that. He said, I never saw the work of God appear so independent of means. And although I could not but continue to use the means I thought proper, yet God seemed, as I apprehended, to work entirely without them. It's that mystery of divine sovereignty and human responsibility we talk about so much here. Our means and our efforts are very meager, and yet God uses them to get his work done. It's just amazing. Hey, man. Next week I'm gonna just find a way to spend some more time on this. This is so good. What about the pietists? Remembering the quiz, right? What about the section on the pietists there? The Danish Hall mission, Moravian missions, just that whole section. What did you mark there?
I just didn't realize how much they did and how huge that movement was. And just, like, obviously we talked about it in class, but reading, I was like, well, they did so much.
Yeah. Zygmunt is a guy we didn't study, but he went to India, remember, and with Plutarch, and they started it. What else?
Really liked about Ziegenbalg on page 39. Going ahead.
Sorry.
Just how they talked about at the end of the paragraph right before Moravian missions, how he was a very bold critic
Mhm.
of Hinduism, yet the Hindu people loved him.
Mhm.
And just, he definitely seems like he found a very impressive balance between the two and not, what's the word that was said, where they would intertwine, like a lot of the Catholic missions.
Syncretism?
Yeah, like just how well he avoided that, and
Mhm.
just how, I don't know. I was really impressed by that.
Mhm. Yeah. And notice the very last line of that section on 39, right before the Moravian missions, Zygmunt was not a colonist. Where almost everybody that had a colonial mindset, he did not. Interesting.
It's interesting too. It seems like a lot of their success in missions, both with the Moravian missions and with like the Danish Hall like place and stuff, it just seemed like they were preaching the true gospel and preaching like Jesus the right way to everybody, but then they were following up their words with their actions, and they were like doing a lot to actually help people physically with like providing places or I don't know, just like different things.
Yeah.
Instead, they like host people in the Danish Hall mission, and like, take care of them and stuff.
Mhm. He did. Yes.
On page 39,
Mhm.
Chris, it's Zing. How do you say his name? Zing.
Zygmunt? I don't know. That's my rendition of it.
It sounds good to me. But here's a quote. It says, "We do nothing as yet but break the ice that those who come after us may find a way to beat out of them." But I guess like the break the ice part, like he had perspective, like in his missions, that like, hey, like we're kind of like preparing for future other missionaries to have success. Like we're just like the beginning. I think it's super cool to have that perspective because like it sounds from the other missionaries, they're like discouraged. Then like you look back in history like afterwards to see the impact they had. And I think it's just cool to see his perspective on that.
Yeah, that is neat. Perspective is everything, isn't it? The way you look at what you're doing. Bless you.
I think it's page 37 that talks about how there were 37 Indian preachers. And there's a quote that says, "Raise up indigenous gospel laborers would be far more effective." I think there are a few missions agencies who really emphasize that idea.
Mhm.
I think that's really important
Yep.
instead of colonizing. Like,
Nationalization and indigenization, two words. Nationalization being the formal handing over, indigenization is them actually becoming a church of their own culture. Yeah.
I didn't realize that had happened like in the early American.
It wasn't common to trust the nationals with the work. Yeah, there was a huge distrust. They're not capable of it, not just in the colonies, but anywhere the missionaries went. That was a long time. That was the main idea.
Mhm.
How far is that clock ahead? Yeah. Anything else from that section? If you isolate any one of these individuals, you look at what they did, it looks very, very tiny, very, very small. But as you read through a chapter like this and you start reading name after name after name after name, and you put all that together, then it becomes significant. And I think that's whatever God leads you to do, always keep in mind that you have the privilege of being a small part of something that is far bigger than we can imagine. Not just today, thinking of yourself in relation to others today who are serving, but others who have served since the beginning. All of us together, we're all little grains of sand, but Christ is making a huge mountain out of all of that. And that should encourage all of us. Yeah. Well, I think what we're going to do, there's just so much more, not just this chapter, we didn't get to the next chapter either. Let me just read one thing in closing here on page 47. It's a quote that Henry Martin, who ministered among the Muslims, I think Noah Kephart actually did a workshop about him last year missions conference. And here's Henry Martin reading or commenting about David Brainerd at the bottom of 47. He says, read David Brainerd today, this is his journal, read David Brainerd today and yesterday and find as usual my spirit greatly benefited by it. I long to be like him. Let me forget the world and be swallowed up in a desire to glorify God. Read Brainerd. I feel my heart knit to this dear man and really rejoice to think of meeting him in heaven. And we talked about some of the negatives, Brainerd, and all that, but yet, God, we're all flawed. Any one of us could become the subject of negative talk. And yet, here's a guy later on, many years later, who's greatly impacted by him. So, the collective thing that God's doing. All right, we'll find a way to talk a little bit more about chapter 3 next time, but you guys have a good weekend.